A woman never belongs to you. It's just your turn. Of course her parents don't have a problem with me being black. She's past the wall. Get your fat ass off the couch, start lifting weights, and learn game. You're welcome.
So you got drunk at a frat party, then fucked the football team? You're not a rape victim, sweetheart.
You're a slut. What's up, guys? It's your man, Donovan Sharp, and welcome to this edition of The Sharp Reality. You can find all episodes of TSR right here on YouTube. You can also find them on SoundCloud, iTunes, as well as donovansharp.com, where you'll find the entire archive starting at episode 1. At Donovan_Sharp is where you can find me on Twitter, and if you have any questions, comments, personal stories, or show ideas, go to the contact tab on donovansharp.com and drop me your thoughts. And if you want to support the show, you can either make a donation at the bottom of my homepage, or you can bookmark our Amazon affiliate link and do all your Amazon shopping through that link. You can also sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is located just above the Amazon link in the sidebar. It's been a while since I've regularly watched the news. Every once in a while, I'll tune in if there's a big story like the firing of James Comey and his testimony and things of that nature. But for the most part, I stay away from that stuff. I'm still able to stay up to date on current events through friends, acquaintances, updates on my phone. But one story I remember from back in 2015, back in the summer of 2015, there was a black male who was in France, and he took a bunch of hostages, and I think he ended up getting shot and killed or whatever. His name was Amidi Coulibaly. Well, they referred to him on the news as African American. Now, he was African French, okay, but they referred to him as an African American, and CNN caught a lot of heat for referring to this black hostage taker as African American instead of African French. Now, some say it doesn't matter, some say it does. I really didn't dig too deep into the story, but it definitely got me thinking about the age-old debate over what blacks or African Americans in this country want to be called, black or African American. And what I have found is that through my experiences, there are two main schools of thought. And those two schools of thought are nationality and race. Now, the debate over what people in this country prefer to be called, what black people in this country prefer to be called, sometimes boils down to nationality versus race. Nationality being African American, of course, race being black. People who argue the nationality side, they tend to cite the importance of not rejecting one's heritage, using adages like never forget where you came from or don't forget the motherland, etc., etc. People who support the African American vernacular, they also say that it has a more positive connotation inside and outside of the black community, and I'll get into more of that a little bit later. However, this side of the debate raises a fair amount of questions, such as, well, should we call white people German American, Polish Americans, whatever bloodlines they come from? Or how are we supposed to know a person's nationality? Why do people assume all blacks originate from Africa? What about those who don't? Do we ask everybody what their nationality is? And on and on and on and on. And that, of course, brings us to the other side of the coin, which is race. Advocates of the designation of the term black when referring to black people or African American people, they often state that it is a much easier, much less invasive way of illusion, rather than trying to be, politically correct by guessing a person's nationality, or worse, perhaps being incorrect. They would rather just mention a person's race. So for example, people of Hispanic or Latino descent, sometimes they take offense to being referred to by the wrong nationality. I've dated a few Puerto Rican girls, a lot of them in New York City, and they detest being mistaken for Dominican. As a matter of fact, Puerto Rican girls refer to Dominican girls as Dominicans, as in dumb people who are Dominicans, Dominicans. We all get a good laugh out of it, but they're like, this is what they do. I dated one Mexican girl who I remember we at this restaurant. She got visibly aggravated when the waitress, who was also Hispanic, asked her if she was from Guatemala. Like she was offended at that. Now that particular thing doesn't happen all the time, but I've seen it enough to get my attention. Now, the one exception, of course, is game application. If you are hitting on a Latina chick or a girl of Hispanic descent, they, guys, just as a side note, Latinas love it when men playfully guess their nationality. They eat this shit up because it allows them to be mysterious. It allows them to be coy. It allows them to be chaste, which of course makes them feel feminine. It makes them receptive to game and escalation. Plus, of course, it's a great conversation starter when you're hitting on hot chicks, hitting on hot Latinas. There are also generational implications with regards to this particular side of the debate. Those on the race side of this argument state that they prefer to be referred to as black because they were born and raised in America. All right. Hyphenated nationalities, as far as they're concerned, only pertain to people who immigrated to America, such as Irish Americans or Italian Americans. Now, on the other hand, I don't know, how weird would it be to hear someone say, "Yeah, go talk to the yellow guy at Best Buy if you want the best deal on computers," when talking about an Asian guy or an Oriental guy or someone of Asian descent, or if you were to say, yeah, or refer to as a Native American as a quote red guy. The truth is, guys, is the only color label that doesn't sound the only two color labels that don't sound weird when you use it to describe someone is black or white, because the moniker person of color in America most likely refers to someone who is black, even though Indians, Mexicans, Samoans, other Pacific Islanders, Hispanics, we all have a darker hue to our skin. Whatever side of the argument people find themselves on, one element that cannot be argued are the social implications. Back when I lived in High Point, North Carolina, I was really good friends with a guy who was a cop for quite a while in New York City. I actually met him in the summer of '98 in our bowling league. Look, the guy was super cool. He was always brutally honest. And listen, we used to pepper this guy with questions because, we're, 18, 19 years old. And, you don't really get to talk to cops who are willing to be that open with you. But he was a cool guy, and he never ever pulled his punches. He always kept it 100. He answered all the questions no matter what they were. I remember him one night, on a league night in particular, telling us that when any given suspect was referred to as a black male, his partner and now lifelong friend, I think they were partners for like 20, 25 years, his partner was always bothered by the description. It wasn't that the description was inaccurate. It was that the phrase black male carried a negative connotation with it and more or less had the potential to alter the mindset of responding police officers. And I remember him saying, he said, "Look, guys, don't mistake me. He said, I'm not saying that when we get the call with that description, we see red and get ready for a gunfight." But he was honest when he said it did make a small difference in our mindset, even with my partner, and his partner was black. Now, I'm not really one who puts too much stock in studies or research, but it would be disingenuous of me not to admit that there is probably some truth to this. I mean, as uncomfortable as it is for some people to hear, the word black, when used to describe a black person, often conjures up negative emotions, both consciously and subconsciously, even with black people. Okay? But on the other hand, the term African American can sometimes sound pretentious or try hard. So, for example, she only dates black guys. Okay, that's on the racial side of the debate. Now, this statement can elicit or imply negativity for many reasons, which of course is a whole. I mean, I've done podcasts on that. So, she only dates black guys, as compared to she exclusively commingles with African American males. Okay, now of course that was a little over the top, but you guys get the idea. there's probably a happy medium out there somewhere. And non blacks in this particular country, I don't know how it is anywhere else, but in the US in particular, they struggle to find this balance on a daily basis because thanks to social justice warriors, being labeled a racist is the new scarlet letter, and they listen, they avoid it like the plague. Dude, people would rather be labeled as a killer or a rapist or a misogynist than be considered a racist. I mean, that's the new scarlet letter these days. Now, that particular fear that permeates the entire that permeates the entire nation, not just the South. So the fear is real. So much so, in my estimation, that a good segment of the population sometimes feels that using the word black to describe a black person would be construed as racist. So those people tend to skew more towards African American or a softer description such as, oh yeah, he's a brother or she was a sister, as their, I guess, de facto preferred rendition for describing a person of color if they don't shy away from any descriptions altogether. I mean, it's so funny. Like when you're asking people to describe that person, they'll do everything they can to not call that person black or imply that the person is black because they're so afraid they're going to say or do the wrong thing. The bottom line here is that people who concern themselves of the opinions of others and those around them, this can be a catch 22 on a lot of different levels because in their mind, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. Now, one at this point would ask, well, what do black people think? Well, 50 years ago, this probably would have been a very easy question to answer. But the melting pot that the U.S. has become, over the last half century makes this a much more complicated one. Mixed race people often feel that they are forced to choose between two labels that don't accurately describe them as people. So choosing to be called either one effectively eliminates the contribution of the other to their particular ethnicity. You can certainly understand that. The same goes with black people whose bloodlines trace back to places other than Africa, such as the Caribbean, Brazil, Central America, or Central American countries like Panama, Nicaragua, etc. Choosing one or the other, it completely omits their nationalities, which they are very proud of. As far as Americans, as far as black Americans like myself are concerned, it's probably a 50-50 split. Listen, I've heard good and bad arguments on both sides of the fence. I mean, you can walk in any barbershop in any black neighborhood and you can pose this question, and that would make for a lively and spirited debate. There's no right or wrong answer here, as far as I'm concerned. And then, of course, then we have white people who were born and raised in Africa. I used to work with a guy out in Atlanta who was born and raised and lived in Johannesburg, South Africa. From the day he was born until of course he moved to Atlanta in when he was 25. He regularly called himself an African American and felt no shame in doing so. And according to him, a good number of white African immigrants refer to themselves as such. He'd be like, "Yeah, I'm an African American. I was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa. I am now an American citizen. I'm an African American." So I guess the last question I'll ask and answer here is, does it matter? Personally, I don't give a shit how people label me or refer to my race, my nationality, my ethnicity, or whatever the hell else they're talking about when they're describing me. As far as I'm concerned, black people, or more specifically black men that spend too much time and energy trying to beat their personal preferences of description into the minds of society at large. Those guys are betas who are displaying solipsism at a feminist level. Nobody really gives a shit what they refer to you as. They say the first thing that comes to their mind. Men of all races, gentlemen, who are confident and who have a strong sense of who they truly are, they have no problem with being called that white guy or that black guy because they know it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. If somebody points to me and refers to me as a black guy, I'm not going to be offended because I'm a black guy. All right? The more shit you give about something as inconsequential as, I guess I should call it, maybe a superficial label, the less you've got going on in your life. All right? To put it bluntly, I've got better shit to do than to sit around and bitch about name classifications. That's what it comes down to. Now, don't mistake me. Having a preference, that's perfectly fine. I've got nothing against that. But putting in too much time and effort and emotion into something as inconsequential as a label is a waste. It's a waste of time. Okay? So the short answer to this question doesn't matter. It only matters as much as a person allows it to. And I know that sounds cliche, okay? But it's true. So, and I'll give you anecdotes, okay? I've been called black. I've been called African American. I've been called a brother. I've been called a nigga. I've been called a nigger. And none of those have affected my life in the least because I don't allow it to, okay? Okay, now maybe being called a nigger, okay, would have ruffled my feathers a little bit more if I had a different upbringing. But the fact that I wasn't exposed to racial issues, really on account of being raised on military bases half my life, may have a lot to do with my lack of sensitivity to, I guess, the silly attempt to enrage me. Like, it's funny, like some people have called me the N-word and they expect me to get upset about it, but I never really do because because I was raised on military bases. It doesn't really strike a chord with me as much as it would someone else. Now, again, I can certainly understand how titles and labels can affect different people, especially when one has grown up around it and they may have had negative experiences related to those particular descriptions. There's no question about it. But at some point in life, we all have to decide not to let certain things control our behavior or our emotion. All right? Listen, I've got a temper problem. I go to anger management once a week. Nobody understands and realizes this more than me. That being said, it still has to be done. If you're gonna let the N word control your life or the N word be your trigger point, you're no better than anybody else out there. It's ridiculous for you to let a word from someone's mouth just send you into a violent rage. It's ridiculous. Now, some of these will be easier than others, but doing this in particular, sort of eliminating this label from your mind, this helps to create mental strength and frame, and eventually you can do this with other parts of your life. That concludes this episode of The Sharp Reality. Guys, be sure to visit donovansharp.com anytime to listen to all podcast episodes and check out other content. Be sure to sign up for my weekly newsletter to stay up to date on all things Donovan Sharp, and bookmark that Amazon link in the sidebar of my homepage. Thanks for listening, guys.